Hi, everyone. Another edition of the Indie Cafe 2 show. I first want to thank Carol Kay of Chaos Productions for the PR on the film and the CD that goes with it. And she's the one who brought us the show. Um, our co hosts are the fabulous Patrick Bamburak, who produces the show, major musician, and myself, Spencer Drate, is with my partner, Judith Salavetz. And what is great about the show, we have a Beatles background. I, in my early years, designed the Imagine trade ads for John Lennon and Apple Records. And Judith and I both combined on 2 albums for Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney's MPL Records. So we have a Beatles background. The 4 albums that we're going to show you were songs that were influenced by music from India. And the big part of this was, I feel, George Harrison of the Beatles, who had intimate talks with and lessons with Ravi Shankar in India. So the 4 albums I want to mention are Rubber Soul and the song on it, Norwegian Wood, Revolver, the songs Tomorrow Never Knows and Love You Too, in Sgt. Pepper, Within Without You, and of course the White Album with the fabulous song Sexy Sadie, which is the story of the Maharishi. We could go into that. But anyway, I just want to give you some intro because Judith and I, we are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, our album covers, and we have an album cover history interviewed on it. I wanted to bring that up. But now we'll go to our interviewee, Peter Compton, who co-directed the film, The Beatles and India. Peter, hi, how are you?
Hi, good to meet you. Great, thank you.
And I'd like to start by saying, what was the concept of doing the film or putting it all together? What was the motivation?
Sure. Okay, so the story begins in the 80s, really. So the corporate company that made the film is an Indian company run by an Indian who lives in the UK, and we worked for a short period with Handmade Films, George Harrison's film company, and we issued the soundtracks to films like With Nell and I and Long Good Friday. So there's always that background interest with George there, and then later, this author Joy Bose, he wrote a book called Across the Universe, which was published by Penguin in 2019, and that was the Indian angle on the Beatles. That was like the basis of where the film came from. So his book extensively researched amongst Indian people that were there at the time in 1968. So he provided us with all the leads, etc. And obviously he co-directed the film with me.
What were the sort of new discoveries and sort of the new insights that you had into the Beatles' history when you were making the film?
Yeah, sure. So the main elements, as I say, of people that we uncovered that were actually in the ashram at the time. So they had direct contact with the Beatles. So right across the board, from a radio interview that George did. In fact, George did an interview with All India Radio, which was lost after it was broadcast and that. So we were very lucky. One of the researchers at All India Radio rediscovered the tape. So that appears in the film. And we also found some fantastic footage that's most of it not been seen before, and that happened during the time in India. So all these pieces came together. I think that's what makes the film very different from other Beatles films at present, because it's a wide ranging view, and it gives very much the Indian view from Indian people that we interviewed in the film. So they give their thoughts on that. And as I say, a lot of them were in the ashram at the time, which is very important. So it gives a scope and shows what that world is like. And of course, when the Beatles were in the ashram, they were isolated, obviously. Rishikesh is a long way from any major city in India. So they were really back together as a group again, really, all 4 of them together. That's why they wrote so many songs, because they had the time to do it. All they were doing was studying meditation.
Questions were, I watched the screener, and to me, what was fascinating about it was that I was watching the Beatles. I think that for everyone, it was a fascination of watching the Beatles in their youth, at a time when, I was also in my 20. Well, no, I wasn't even 20 then when this was when they went to India in search of this spirituality. But it was a time for the hippies, if you recall, and and so I was part of that hippie movement, and I was like 16 or something like that. And what was amazing to me, I didn't know, was how the Beatles, they were so instrumental, and I didn't realize this at the time. I should have. They were so instrumental in bringing meditation into the world. I actually was one of those individuals that I actually am a member of TM,
Right.
and what's amazing is in those days I joined TM. I must have been 16 years old in New York City, and the fee for joining TM was $25. I understand today, if anybody wanted to learn meditation through the TM, the Maharishi's method, they'd be shelling out $3,000.
That's right.
which
Yeah, I
is
think it's a
incredible.
one-on-one thing now, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
But what I learned, one of the things that I learned watching this film about the Maharishi was and it was not a positive thing. It was I remember, if you recall, Peter, there was they were talking about who the Maharishi felt was open to receiving his teachings and his spirituality. And one of the things I remember from the film that was said was that he felt that only intelligent individuals were, and this was what really got me, which was, it really blew my mind when they said this in the film, was that only intelligent individuals and people of wealth, of high income, were able to understand and receive his teachings. That kind of blew my mind. I kind of like, what are you talking about, Maharishi?
Yeah.
Here, we have all the, and I was surprised that, and this was earlier on. This was not later in the film when the Beatles were, found out more information about. You have to watch the film to get more information about the Maharishi that the Beatles obtained later into their meditation journey. And as far as questions, I'm just wondering, did where was this documentary seen? Did you enter it in film festivals? And who has been watching this, or who has seen this film other than, well, now it's going to be worldwide, right?
Yeah. I mean, the American date is next February the 15th, so that'll be on BritBox. So
right.
and
But has it been seen before this?
it's done a few festivals in Spain and different countries. Yeah, the UK launch was last June. It's difficult to sell documentaries now because there's so many documentaries being produced, non-stop everywhere. I think that's why it's very difficult to have Netflix, anything like that. So you really have to work the documentary to get it in, especially with the Beatles as well, because as you probably know, a lot of Beatles documentaries are not great. They use stock footage and dreadful reproductions of like Beatles type music and that, which we obviously avoided completely. We went for a very strictly Indian, Indian performers and that, as you can hear on the sound. Well, it's not the soundtrack album, the music inspired by the film.
Right. Well, but I think that I have this feeling that it should be very well received by the public because, the Beatles, people find them fascinating. I mean, just watching them, in their 20s, just walking and talking and their mannerisms, and it's a feast for your eyes. and I just feel that it should be, you should have good success with this. I mean,
Well, I hope
can't
so.
imagine-
Yeah, I think that important with the Beatles as well. I mean, they're so young. I mean, they're all in their, they're all in their mid-20s, and they're going for spiritual guidance. It's something you don't see in contemporary pop stars nowadays at all. It's a very different world, and they actually went there they went there to become teachers of TM, not just to to learn meditation. They were going to become teachers. And it's interesting. I'm sure you've watched the Get Back film. They're talking about India in episode 2. They talk about Maharishi. And that's only 8 months down the line from when they came back from India. And as the film underlines, they also, right to the end of Maharishi's life, they were still, beholden to him completely. All 4 of them, even though it ended badly when George and John left, but it ended well, before his death and that. So he was respected, definitely, by them.
Yeah, and I see in the movie myself that they forgave him.
Yes.
There's a part, right, which is very interesting. Paul says it on the microphone, and I thought it was very moving. What really interested me also was the integration of George Harrison in the love of the sitar and the instrumentation, and how he evolved that into the albums that we talked about earlier in the songs of the Beatles. And he had a very pure nature, and it seemed on an interview, someone described him as almost like a very pure nature, Peter, a nice human being, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a he's a boy that left school, and his life had been mapped out as an electrician. That was it, then suddenly the Beatles happen and he becomes, I wouldn't say, perhaps a mystical is probably the wrong word, but he becomes, a highly respected person in India. We did a lot of interviews in India, and he used to visit a lot after 70s and 80s, and interviews we couldn't use. There just wasn't enough space. People absolutely adored him. He would go to dinner parties. He was much loved in India all the time, and obviously that's where his body was taken after his death. And that I think he was laid to rest in the Ganges. Yeah, I think his ashes were in the Ganges. I'm not sure which spot at all, but
and there's so many topics brought up in the movie between the LSD experience and that whole thing, and of course they bring up Brian Epstein's dies. That's very interesting because that's a big play in their life when Brian Epstein dies. He was their guru, right? And,
very much so. Yeah, so the Maharishi's there at the right time. Whether he became a father figure, I suppose he did for a couple of months, definitely. I mean, they were going to go to India in September '67, but because Brian died, it all got pushed back into February. So that's when they made Magical Mystery Tour. So when they went to India, they're quite beholden. You can see from the photos and that, all gathered around him, etc. And obviously Ringo was the one that went early. But he still came back to Maharishi, as it's mentioned in the film. In that he mentions that he still meditates, and of course he's involved with TM now with David Lynch and Paul McCartnney. And John, there's a track on the album India, which you think, oh, John must have written that in India, but that comes from 1980. I mean, he was still singing about India, just before his death. So the deep influence for him is perhaps not showed so much in the songs like George's, but it's still most definitely all there.
I like a quote that I wrote down in the movie, a description of the Beatles. Someone says, "Success has not gone to their heads." I thought that was very interesting,
I think it's true. Again, if you look at Get Back, I mean, that captures them in the studio. They're nice to everybody. There's always a nice word for the tea lady that appears in the film. All they do, their food is tea and toast. There's nothing. People. McCartney listens to Mal Evans talking about, giving him some words for some of the songs and that, And then there's that scene when he teaches that. He teaches that kid, I think one of the sound guys, about playing the piano and that. So there's just no elitism. It's not like a closed shop or anything like that.
There's we should talk a little bit about also the CD, which has some great musicians on it that cover Beatles songs. Could you talk a little bit bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's reflected obviously in the film. At the end of the film, it just goes to show in contemporary India, the Beatles are
You want
as
to take this?
strong an
No,
influence
no.
as they are in the in every other country in the world. So that's all there, and all these artists now, from Anushka Shankar to these various top line Indian players, and they're all very keen to do it. They absolutely loved it. We let them choose the songs they wanted to do. And the album just sounds great to me. It could easily have been very stylistically cliched, with like sitar on every track and that, but they've like created something different with all the songs, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that turned me on. The
Yeah.
arrangements, Peter. The arrangements are very creative.
Yeah,
All the songs are very creative, and it'll blow someone's ear because it's not what they think they're going to expect as a cover.
Yeah.
And it's going to be all different types of arrangements, which really was very creative in my ear,
yeah. It's a difficult one to sell because people are going to have preconceptions of what that's going to sound like. So it'd be great for people to hear it as is. So, and I think the musicians that are interviewed at the end of the film are fascinating as well. What they say and how they've been influenced by everything.
So someone says in the movie that John Lennon looked healthier.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I think he does actually. He looks pretty bad, but in that period up to Feb '68, he looks pretty out of it all the time. And I think he improves. Although they when they start growing beards and that late on, about 2 months in, they don't look so good. But they came back to London and that, and they look good again about a month later. The problem with the Beatles in that period as well, from that era onwards, from May '68, they never appeared together. So whenever any photos or anything like that are all private photos or studio shots, but the days of the press call had gone. When news companies had access to all 4 Beatles and that. So that's always a problem for us, the footage kind of dies out probably in about late '68. So it was a difficult to access stuff for that, but we managed to find the best stuff we could find, or we could
Yeah, there must have been a lot of footage we had to go through, right? I mean,
yeah, there was a lot, and obviously photos as well. There's a lot of photos that never been seen before that originated in India. People had them stuck in photo albums. They'd never taken them out. We had to lift off the cellophane on the photo album and very carefully take it away to a print shop and get a good image done. It's very much like Raghu Rai. He's the number 1 photographer in India, and he got that shot, which we do talk about extensively, when he got the very first shot in the ashram with all the press there.
Yeah, I noticed there are a lot of celebrities there, like Mike Love and all these other factors.
Yeah. Well, again, that holds up to what you were saying, about the the wealth and that. Well, it is mentioned, that they would give part of their salary. That would be that they'd be like a subscription base. They give a percentage of their salary. But the Beatles made it very clear that they never paid for anything at all. But then again, Maharishi got all that publicity and that, and obviously he was driving to get that film made.
Yeah,
and that's obviously that's one of the reasons they quit. And of course, he went on tour with the Beach Boys after the Beatles left, and that Mike Love took him to America again, and he was like the opening act for the Beach Boys on a tour.
Wow,
and it lasted about 3 dates, and the whole thing just collapsed because obviously audiences just wouldn't sit and listen to Maharishi with his with his sermons, etc.
Yeah, you should know, Peter, that Judith and I designed an album for the Beach Boys. So,
right, which one?
Summer in Paradise. And
right, okay. What year was that?
Mike Love loved the design. He would talk about our design for the album. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a quote here I wrote. It said it was like a CIA camp. What was that about?
Yeah, that's right. That's a question that was asked in Parliament. So the authorities in India were very wary about Maharishi, and obviously all these Westerners coming to this fairly remote place, Rishikesh, and the questions asked there whether it was like infiltration by the CIA or the Russians as well. And obviously we've interviewed the Russian guy in that, and he does reveal, that they used it as an instrument against the West, like making friends with the Maharishi. Although he comes quite a sort of post after the Beatles period, So he's not so much of that moment and that. But it was seen as a sort of Western influence, I suppose.
So George Harrison is like the center of gravity in terms of the spirituality, as my sense of this, this sense of connection to the energy of the universe and bringing, his bandmates and his sort of surrogate family in that sense together into this experience. And, as you mentioned, he continued to have this strong, connection with India, with that space until, the end of his life. Could this have happened, this entire Beatles and India experience, had not George been the prime mover of setting this into motion? Would we even have this as part of the Beatles story?
Yeah, I mean, he was the junior member of the band and that, and he was lucky to get a song per album and that, and it's all down to his wife Pattie Boyd, who saw an advert for Maharishi. So that's when they all went to the Hilton Hotel in London, August '67. And I think George was instantly struck then. Obviously, he knew a lot about India just meeting Ravi Shankar, as we underline in the film, and that the famous meeting they had for the first time at the Asian Music Circle. So yes, he was definitely the driver, and it's interesting that when they abandoned the Maharishi in April, he couldn't face going back to London, so he went off elsewhere in India for 2 or 3 weeks. And of course, he toured India as well. Ravi Shankar took him to all the major sites in India, all the major religious sites, obviously, in Taj Mahal, all those places. As mentioned in the film, Patty does that small travel log. And that's it, and he returns all the time. So John Lennon went back there in '69 he'd heard about another holy man in the mountains and that, and him and Yoko went to stay in Mumbai. But as far as we know, they didn't find a holy man at all. They just stayed in their hotel room. But George, I would agree totally. George is the driver of everything, most definitely, and he kept it up for the rest of his life. And it's quite weird, as you see as well. Ravi, him and Ravi are just intertwined. It's quite incredible. And as someone else says in the film, it's almost like destiny brought them together. Just instant click. 2 different cultures just come together. So that's one of the things we're most pleased about in the film, I think, just highlighting that element of George.
Yeah, Peter, I think also bringing up in the beginning when we opened up the show, those songs that I mentioned probably were primarily George Harrison playing those instrumentation on those songs, right?
Yes, it would. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean the real masterpiece is probably Within You, Without You and Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, I mean that holds up fantastically well today. And obviously they had those birthday parties in the ashram where they all played musical instruments and that, and George was playing the sitar then, but he kind of left the electric guitar for quite a long period after that, and then obviously gave up his studying the sitar because it's so difficult. I mean, it's, as Shankar says, you have to dedicate your life to playing the instrument and do nothing else. That's it. So, and it was great that there's a lot of the footage of Ravi Shankar we got from a documentary that was made about him that came out in 1970, which has got the footage of him and George on that cliff top on the Pacific coast and that, where he's giving him lessons in playing, etc. So it was good to have all that in it as well.
I liked also where you find out where they stayed there, the rooms and the locations, and nobody knew anything about that. So that was a good thing to see on the doc,
Yeah, it's I always say most of the places in England where they played and Liverpool and that are gone, but you can go to India and it's just a jerry-built bungalows and everything, but it's all there completely intact. They don't look great, but I mean, when you wander around there, it's just an amazing place. I mean, Maharishi's bungalow is spectacular. He had like real luxury bungalow, and of course they did everything on the roof there, out of the way of the other people that were studying that. So that was like the VIP department of the ashram and that. So they did all those photos of them on the roof is them exclusively with the Maharishi giving like 1-to-1 lessons.
The film will be on BritBox, is that right?
Yes, coming out on the 15th on BritBox, and it's on HBO in South America.
So this is good timing, Peter, to have the show now, just
Oh,
before,
he's
so
definitely,
people
yes.
can see it.
Yes,
And-
thank you very much for doing the arranging the interview. Yeah, it's good
Yeah,
to talk about it.
we want to thank you so much for being on. I thought it was a great film,
Thank
and
you.
we all do. So, and we wish you heavy success on it. I'm sure
Thank
it
you.
will. And everybody who loves the Beatles is going to see it.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Yeah, well, Carol,
millions of people.
Millions.
yeah, we got the
of
right
people,
person
she
doing
said.
it. Carol's fantastic with her PR company is really good. So
Oh yeah, Carol's
fantastic.
is our, I don't know, our rock and roll PR guru.
Yeah, she is. She's very rock and roll, definitely. Yeah.